Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you're ready for a good conversation today. Today we're going to be looking at the concept, the question of uh, what type of documentation should we be receiving as part of our submittals. And that's going to be a conversation I think is really going to be important for us to kind of bring together a good idea of what kind of information is expedites the plan review process. I'm having that conversation currently with the design team where they submitted some documents but not all the documents, and so now we're in this limbo of what more do you need. Well, if we had a nice simple understanding or a cohesive understanding of that documentation, it could expedite that process. So that's the kind of the impetus behind the question. Some of the questions we've received, this is one of those trainings that people have asked what kind of documentation should be submitted. So we'll go through some of that today. So remember, as always, the chat is open. If you have questions, feel free to let me know, throw them out there. And then I'll throw it in for those that have joined in more recently. And I'll do it again here once I remember, here about 5 after. One more time for those that might be joining in the next few minutes as we start up. So we understand, one of the questions I always ask, even when we talk about something as simple as what kind of documents should be provided as part of my construction details, I'm still going to ask that question, why? Why do I need this information? Why do I have a building code? Why am I going through this process? If you've hired a design professional, surely they know how to build a building, right? Well, that's not the reason why we have code. The reason why we have code is because we're looking to provide that uniform minimum expectation about how a building is built, whether we talk residential or commercial. We've done a lot of residential in the past, and so we've kind of focused this year a little more on the commercial, but at the same time, we can see the parallel between the two. We build and develop codes and adopt codes as a state in order to provide a uniform minimum expectation of how buildings should be built. And that gives us that appreciation of things like the understanding means of egress and fire rated assemblies, how we ventilate buildings properly, how we fasten different components together to make sure that the roofs don't fly off, right? And then we get into this concept of energy conservation where we really see the importance of proper documentation in order to ensure full project success. So again, we'll have this conversation, but I think that really drives us understanding why we kind of get into that who does it. Normally that person that's going to be reviewing those documents is going to be the plans examiner, the plan reviewer. And so what are some of those essential duties of a plan reviewer, right? It's not just to, although I do think a good plan reviewer is going to be in charge of the coffee pot, right? But they do a little bit more than that. They're a lot of times the conduit or the connection between the builder and the inspection department, right? The builder and the code is going to be that glue that puts them together is going to be a plans examining staff. And there's a series of different functions that we as plans examiners perform. And so I've highlighted a few of them, but really the role and duty of a plan reviewer is kind of reflective, or is really reflective of the accuracy of the plan set that's provided to them, right? Section 107.3 of the residential code, it tells us, and we have similar expectations. I just remember the one from residential tells me that the building official shall examine or cause to be examined the accompanying submittal documents and shall ascertain by such examination whether the structure is code compliant, is compliant with the code. When we stamp plans, we don't stamp them saying they're approved. We've reviewed all the calculations and everything looks right. No, what we're doing is we're reviewing it to see what kind of information, to make sure that we have a reasonable basis to believe that it's code compliant, right? And so again, there are essential duties that we as plans examiners perform, and as part of that, we have essential tools. Now, this class is a little bit more focused, or I'm going to say tailored to our plans review staff and those of us that are plans examiners. and also those designers who have to interact with them. And so part of those essential tools is not just having a proper ruler, right? It's not just having the proper scale that sits next to your desk, and so that you can have all that information. So if you actually you can't see it, but I have two things on my desk right within arm's reach: a scale and a baseball bat, right? Because I might, after I do work with this one, I might need this one, right, to get this information into the head of my design teams, right? I'm just kidding. I just have that there for anyhow. But again, that's part of that is communication, and that's really what we're trying to do through proper understanding of the submittal documents we need. We want to be active learners. We want to be respectful, empathetic, and that kind of thing. But more importantly, this is a form of communication through the documentation that we receive. I was doing a training yesterday, and we looked at a couple of different plan sets. And some plan sets are demonstrate a sense of simple communication, right? And then there are some plan sets where it is so overwhelming, it's like talking to the guy for the Micro Machines commercial, which will bring back some memories for those of you that might have that, who might be a little bit on my side of the age gap, right? But if I can condense everything into 8 pages and then make it so inconceivable to follow the path or to read the notes versus having something that's a little bit more, simple and clear, so that we can have effective communication of the questions we're asking. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. And then there are physical tools, obviously, right? Scales, sites, plans, space, technology. Most of us are probably doing electronic plan review at this point. There are days I still wish I could go back to my old school copy of it. I remember back in the good old days, right? When you would take the large printed printed details over to the copier and copy a 1-page sheet on 8.5 by 11, so that you could keep it with you. I usually did that with like the index page or something. Digression. That's a whole nother conversation. But understanding that, let's move on. We understand that in this concept of plan review, there are multiple types of plan review, right? We have 4 basic types that we generally see. Sometimes we perform what we call over-the-counter plan reviews. Those are going to be for more simple, maybe simplistic designs, right? Where we're coming in and we're expecting to have that conversation at the counter. We sometimes will also empower our permit technicians to assist in this process. We'll have people there. That's where we're going to have the deck, the patio, the basement finish, the remodel, those types of conversations. Maybe some smaller projects. A lot of times, this is usually where we've got those little build guides, right? I don't know what you call them. We always call them build guides, that would sit over on the wall, and we would pull off a build guide and say, hey, you're doing this, you want to follow these kind of instructions, or let's pull this simplified packet and complete a plan review, not a plan, but a plan submittal, and do that over-the-counter plan review right there, right? Sometimes we do this by appointment, where we'll schedule a time, whether that's in person or online. We'll set up a Zoom call with the designer and walk through the process, walk through the project, saying, okay, well, you want to do this? Yeah, we want to do this. Well, let's draw in some ideas. Let's visualize, and this is really effective, especially given the modern world, right? Most of us know how to operate a Zoom, or obviously you wouldn't be here, or a Teams, or I hate Google Link and WebEx, but hey, they exist and I've used them and have them on my computer, right? So we're used to this concept of an appointment-based schedule. Now, when I worked in Columbus, one of the things that we did was very interesting. We combined those two concepts into over-the-counter appointments. And so, what we did is they would set up plans examiners. They had a series when you walk into the one-stop shop. We called it the permit center. You had a row of offices of offices right there, and plans examiners would actually sit. They were given rotations, and you would actually sit in those different offices and wait for somebody to come to the counter. And if their problem, if their concern, their project was more than the counter staff wanted to deal with, I'm just going to put it that way, then you were given to one of the people in a room. And then you would come in the room and we'd sit down with you and review your plans and have those conversations. So we kind of had a little bit of a hybrid between the two. But again, an appointment is something that again we can understand that concept. And in that environment, you're coming in and saying, hey, when you come for this appointment, bring all of this information. Well, it's going to be difficult if you don't understand that, if we don't have a list of submittal documents to have that conversation. Well, I need you to bring all the details. Well, what does that mean? Right? I'm one of those people that I've said this several times. Whenever I'm unsure or I feel that there's ambiguity or in non-decisive conversation or decision making, I usually will start off with some polite phrase like, I'm confused, right? I'm confused. What do you want me to bring? Do you want me to bring you the entire spec book? Do you want me to bring just the pages I have questions on? What do we want to see, right? The conversation I'm having with the design firm on a particular project right now is, I'm confused. We've talked about heating load calculations. We've talked about wall designs. They're not the same. Bring them together. Let's look at them side by side and we'll confirm if we're designing a building based off of this, then I need the details to match so that when it's built, it matches what you design the equipment to be based upon, right? We'll talk about that again in this concept, but this appointment concept of plan review is critical to have a list of what we're expecting you to bring to the plan, to the session, to the plan review session. We have conventional, I call it, plan review, which is again the old school, bring your paper, drop it off, we'll do it in the next 15 to 30 days, right? Whatever that time schedule is, that's old school. That's kind of migrated into electronic plan review, right? Submit it through the portal, upload the files, and then we'll start the plan review. Both of those scenarios, many of us are used to. It's all about file management. It's about time management. One of the realities is things show up in some files that don't show up other files, or vice versa with paper records. It's that constant, what do I need? What more do I need? How do I better demonstrate these concepts? So again, we understand there are different types of plan review because we understand that code compliance and project success begins on that paper, right? The code tells us whether we're looking at residential, commercial, or energy, a specific function. We need certain types of submittal documents, right? And the code tells us, here's the things we should be providing: the construction documents, the data, anything that shows that descriptor of of the project scope of work. Well, actually, I'm gonna back up here a second. I'm gonna do some Q&A, right? That's what the fun part of being in Q&A. How many of you, just by raise of hand, still utilize over-the-counter plan review? Do you get projects over the counter where you're doing them right there at the desk? You're evaluating projects. Raise your hands. There can't be just two of you. Well, maybe there are just two of you, right? Okay. Now, how many of you perform primarily your plan review through appointment, where you've actually scheduled a time and tell them to come in and with all their details? Okay. Not seeing a whole lot, not seeing any hands go up. How many of you still use, I'm gonna ask this, how many of you still bring in old school paper plans? I love it. I love the smell of fresh paper, right? Weirdo. And then how many of you have transitioned to full electronic plan review at this point? All right. Got a good number there, a significant number. So again, it's part of that reality that we're seeing. We've tried, we as a staff have allowed for both, right? Where we said, okay, you can bring in some plan if you because that's the reality, right? We all have people that that aren't tech savvy, and so they will bring in the plans as well as, or maybe they'll come in and we'll have to talk about it that way. What we've tried to do a lot of times is really all about trying to manage time because of the amount of communication that takes place. I'm thinking of of a project where, again, the contractor, the design team is in a different city, right? If I was building, let's just say I was in Clovis and my design team is driving over from out, is actually from Albuquerque. If I work only in a conventional paper world, then everything has to be brought over, right? So there's a hybrid environment, I think, at times, and vice versa. The problem then becomes, it can become a problem in reverse, where everything's electronic, and when the system's down, now we get no more plans, or if a file's too large, or it's not coming across the right way, that can create problems. I had one file that, however it was saved or sent, it ended up messing up the detail pages to where the lines would cover each other and you couldn't read anything. So I sent back, maybe 20 different pages in that project where electronically the text covered the line above it in the rendering process. And so it made it extremely difficult to read. And so we had to have them resend those pages. But again, that's part of that reality. And so it's part of understanding how we plan review is going to affect what documents we need. And so there are some essential information that we're going to want to do an effective plan review, right? We've talked about this before. You know how I am about my Hunt for Red October story. If we got the right plan, we can build the right building. And so there are going to be a variety of different systems that are generally part of a building, right? We understand we're going to need architectural drawings, we'll need structural drawings, mechanical drawings, electrical drawings, plumbing drawings, energy. Sometimes we bring in the landscaping, depending on how that works. Normally, that's where we'll find our parking calculations. We'll find our setbacks. We got our site plan that tells us what's the relationship to other buildings on site or in neighboring parcels. All of these pieces of information are important for us to give a good representation of the building project. Energy is one of those components that when we document, we really need to pay attention to the submittal expectations. Now, we have provided a series of, at one point on the website should be our 21 list of residential submittals. Actually, I'm in the middle of updating for another program, our submittal checklist. And so what we'll be doing, I'm going to make sure we just tie in the commercial side for you as well. This is digression. This is the essential submittal document list that we've created based on compliance paths. What we're doing now, and we're in the process of developing, I think I might have a copy of it here, you guys, is we're trying to develop a set of a little bit more visually appealing documents. Maybe I don't have it. It's okay. And so when we create that document, this will be a little bit more informational, a little bit more visually cueing to where you'll see those. Let me see if I can do this. I really want you guys to see this. Some visual. Because one of the things we think is important is that people understand the totality of what's going on in a visual manner. So let's move this over here, and then let me reshare the screen. And so what we'll be doing is we're working towards a plan that'll allow us to better refocus, right? Because we understand that compliance paths are a huge part of the conversation. Once you understand the compliance path, that generally affects what we're expecting, right? Whether we're looking for, again, HVAC calculations, or we're looking for um, envelope questions. So again, this is part of what we'll be doing in the time to come to help refocus what it is that we see and receive during our plan review projects. Because what when it, I think this quote is important, or is relevant in that if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance, right? Think about the context of that. You know, uh, we hear from time to time different people will say, well, it's so expensive to build a building. We go through so much plan review. Um, those costs. And so the reality is that's less expensive than doing it wrong, because then we're going to come back and either have to fix it, or we're going to have some liability issues that come back, right? So Paul McNulty, who was a former U.S. Deputy Attorney General 20 years ago, put this comment out that if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. And again, it's so true when it comes to the expectations of what we get during plan review. So again, when we understand the why, we understand why we get it, we understand what we're getting, then we can figure out how we're going to get it. And I think the part of what I want to make sure that we understand, and again, when we think about the expectations of those submittal documents, who are we trying to communicate to, right? Who are the comments, especially we as plans examiners, who are the comments that we're trying to create going back to? Right? It's not that they're reading our minds, right? They're not in the room with us as we're looking at a single piece of paper. And so that's when we do this conventional, traditional, electronic plan review, there's no one across the desk. So we need to be very succinct, very specific and accurate, and refer to page numbers when we try to determine a response, right? If I was looking to create a response, this kind of a list is not, to me, going to be very helpful. Right? It tells me I've got a list of things under one comment. And I prefer, and again, I understand we're all different. I'm just telling you what I like to do. I like to keep it simple. I like to keep it individual comments so that you can address one comment at a time, and I don't have to break these out into different sub points, right? So if I have a project that says, hey, I'm looking at, the garage must comply with section 309, and we're talking, and I know I've got the wrong code section reference here, but if I'm saying that you need to have the proper fire rated door, and I just put a comment in like the one at the top, while it's a little bit descriptive, I want to go a little further, right? I want to include a sheet number. This is one of the things I make sure I do. I always try to include a sheet number. If the information is missing from a particular project, whether, again, I'll put a sheet number where I would like it to be, right? If that's, a good example is going to be if I have a project that doesn't have an air leakage protocol assigned to it. There's no air leakage details. I'm going to say on page, and most of the documents, or most of the normal system notes are on page G1. I'm going to say put it on G1. G1 does not appear to have, or does not appear to include, or any of the air leakage control or testing protocols. Please provide, right? If I'm looking at this, I'm going to explain that it appears that the door providing access between the garage and the dwelling does not meet the minimum fire rating requirements. Please provide confirmation that the access will be a 20-minute, not rate, minuted rated assembly, right? So again, I'm going to give them a little bit more information about what I'm seeing, what I'm looking to get back from them, and the code from which I'm basing my comment, right? If I've got something that says the stairs do not comply, that's not going to help. I need a little bit more. I'm going to say refer to, or again, sheet A5, the tread depth of the stairs is required to be 10 inches, right? So again, these are going to be little things that I think are important for us to understand. And when we think about the context of everything, again, another example there. All of those comments come together so that once we have a complete project, we can then move into the compliance construction phase, right? The construction and compliance, I guess, is probably the best way to organize it. But when we have that level of clarity, and this is just me, I typically, as a plans examiner, and I think most of us do this as a standard practice. Actually, when I do plan review, I actually keep my notes because I'm old, or at least I pretend to be old. So I actually write down my notes on paper before I type them into the computer, into the Word document. But those comments stay with the file, and so as a inspector, I know my plans examiner is going to have those comments to draw attention to potential areas that may have not been always considered in the in the design process. So if I see here that there was a comment asking about the east wall is located 4 feet from the property line and must be constructed as a 1 hour fire rated assembly, right? If I see that comment, then as a building inspector, when I go out to do my verification of the building, I'm going to measure that east wall's distance to the property line, or verify or have some demarcation. I'm going to make sure that east wall has a fire rated assembly in it, because the rest of the building's not. And so I'm going to have to know where I'm going to be looking for that special or that different type of assembly. And then how am I going to provide it? So again, there's a variety of things that come into that, and that consistency, that clarity, like we've got the comment in the chat, is going to be helpful to making sure we get a good response, right? I get that comment. I've told you about it a couple weeks ago when I had one that said, the question was, please provide a visual depiction of the building thermal envelope as required by section C103.21. And the response I got back was, all insulation shall be part of the building thermal envelope. Are you sure? Because there's you called it sound attenuation insulation on page whatever in a floor assembly. Are you sure that's where you put the building thermal envelope? Because then when you have a building thermal envelope, that means when you start talking about where's our water resistive, vapor resistive, air resistive barrier systems, right? Because you're saying there's separation between these, or is it, so again, that's a two-way road, and part of that is having that conversation face to face or over the phone with the design team, saying, hey, you said you supplied this, it's not here. Can we get an update? Can you send it over an email and I can attach to the file, right? And so it's important to have that kind of a checklist guide. Like I've told you, I'm working on one for New Mexico for the energy code side. Hopefully should have it by the next time we do an energy training on plan review at the end of the month, or the first week of every month. But again, it's good to keep this for again, records, for just making sure that everyone's on the same page moving forward on what those expectations are going to be. We got a few minutes to run through some more of these just real quick clarification things. Remember, part of what we're getting is going to be that site plan. That site plan, although when we're talking about it from an energy context, is important to have, because it's going to allow us to understand the building as a whole, right? Are we going to see things identified on that site plan that could impact energy conservation? Again, more importantly, if we're thinking in the context of maybe surrounding buildings, are we going to have overhangs? Do we not have overhangs that may impact daylighting in commercial operations, or again, residential operations? There's going to be orientation changes that may affect some of the requirements in the commercial side. And so that's again why it's somewhat important. One of the things we'll typically get is some type of a floor plan. This again is where I'm going to need that visual depiction of that thermal envelope, so that I know if this garage is part of my thermal envelope or not. Is it a semi-conditioned or a fully conditioned space? What is that requirement? What is that? How is that impacted by, again, the elevation page? We normally see these things, and that's where, again, I usually go back and say, hey, here's a great page to put on my visual depiction. I've got a couple really good examples. Actually, I'll pull one up. Don't take it. Oh, there we go. I was looking at. Well, we'll do it another time. We'll do it when we do plan review. So part of that submittal is they've actually provided an energy thermal envelope. I've got several where they've done a singular page, taking the concepts provided, the same details they see in both the floor plan and the elevation or the sectional view, and they'll say they'll put all those together just to draw the quick line to say, here's the thermal envelope. right? One page, thermal envelope, boom, done, right? So again, those are things that we want to think about in those designs. Obviously, we got structural plans, MEP plans. I know that's usually something we always talk about deferring. Um, Again, it's going to be important to understand, how are we getting air where it needs to go? Is it inside the thermal envelope? Is it outside? And that, how's that we know that affects several components, as well as, again, some of those plumbing features. When we start talking about, especially in commercial, which I didn't want to put in multiple pictures here. When we start talking about commercial, how long is that longest pipe, right? How do we need to have some kind of recirculator in the process? Or again, what's that? How's that affect that thermal loss in those pipe systems or air systems? Roof plans very similar. When we start talking about penetrations, maybe solar panel installations, who knows what we can have it come up in the context of different venting and ridges and penetrations that we'll see on a roof plan that we weren't thinking about, and then calling out and saying, hey, remember, we got to have these things. So when we talk about the energy code specifically, let's get a little bit more in depth here. We understand there are certain documents that we need to have in order for us to be able, right? If we have expectations of plan review and what information we're looking for, then we're going to have expectations about what the outcome is. Everyone's goal in the process of plan review is that you get a project approved to where it can move forward, right? I know sometimes it's questionable, right? But I've never seen actual plan review staff that have tried to find reasons not to approve a project, right? We want to approve projects. We just want to make sure they're safe in that process. And so we were looking for that final stamp of reviewed by for code compliance. And part of that is going to be having the right documentation. So I'm going to jump through. We got some, I think it's important to understand. We'll talk about this in the context of different things. Symbols do matter, whether we're looking at CMU. If I was to look at this symbol, then a lot of times I'm going to think, if I'm thinking, depending on in its location in a building system, it may actually be a type of insulation, right? Versus a type of structural component. So again, making sure that we understand that different designs call for different information. Again, symbols matter is what I was kind of going for as far as what we're expecting when we go to on site to see those buildings. And remember, there is no complete only naming convention that's out there. Designers can follow whatever method of naming, numbering that they want. Most of them try to be consistent, put those legends on there, but there's not one AIA doesn't come up with a list of these are the only named ways to demonstrate a single side hinge door. I had a project the other day that had different colored door lines meant different ratings for fire resistance, fire rating doors. That was made sense until they only put it in black. And it was like, so we've got a 2-hour rated room with a unrated door. Well, no, it didn't get caught up. We didn't highlight that one. Well, see, that's where we get this problem, right? So if I'm building something in the field and my brain would tell me this should probably be a rated door, a rated assembly, but it's not because the color is wrong, it could have an impact. Or if I print in all black and white and I don't get any of those colors, again, it can have an impact. Digression for another day. But again, we see that symbols matter throughout the process. And so does, process. And again, I love old school using sticky notes. I'm just going to throw that back out there one last time. And then when we think about process and process of plan review, we always think about it, do we do it as a singular person, or do we do it as a team approach? Do we do it linear, as in we take section 3 and move through section whatever, 29 or something? Or do we just do it physically? We look at the base level and then build up, or look at the roof and come down. Different people treat it different ways. I'll ask that question for you. For most of you, or for if your organization, if your team, if you as an individual do more of the plan review from a singular person taking complete control, of a project, raise your hand. The alternative would be if you have uh, would be the team, and the team is going to be when you may have a mechanical plans examiner separate from a structural or architectural plan reviewer. So if you use the singular if you take a project and you own that project from start to finish, raise your hand. Okay. If you do that as a team, where you have different people doing different functions within that plan review process or design process, raise your hand. Okay, so most of us, it looks like, are more on that second side where we're taking that and we're sharing that information, that responsibility. For Shums, we do it as team. We do it the team approach. Each discipline takes a different part of a particular project to try to speed along the process. Um, it, it's so anyhow. So understanding the way we do plan review, again, driving us back to this conversation about energy code. We understand how we do it. We understand why we have an energy code, right? We're looking to effectively use energy and provide for flexible, innovative systems and approaches to things for both commercial and residential buildings with these different expectations about submittals. But when we look at that list of items, whether we're looking at residential or commercial, we know that the first thing we need is that energy compliance path. And again, this is why this is important. I would put this on those submittal checklists as something you need to know from the very beginning is what are we going to pick for our energy compliance path? Because we know there's more than one. And even within those concepts of the three traditional, we always say there's three. There's prescriptive, performance, and ASHRAE. Well, in all reality, we know there's more than three because we have prescriptive that uses an R value, prescriptive that uses a U factor, prescriptive that uses a COM check, and then we have total building performance, which could be any litany of different performance methods, right? And then we have ASHRAE 90.1 is not just a singular approach, it's 4 or 5 approaches itself, right? It's got a prescriptive, a performance, and a cost calculation. So again, it's not enough to just say what we're doing. We need to be very specific, right? We need to know it's more than that we're just picking a new building out of the group. We're building a new building, but that we're actually going to be building what is the resource that we're basing that upon, right? What is the compliance path? Because each of those compliance paths is going to have something different to present to us, as we'll see here in a second. Now, again, with total building performance, we're going to get some type of report. So for the most part, a lot of times I see a lot of prescriptive. A lot of times people tell me this is the prescriptive method, and then we'll just document whatever we need to document along the way, right? Not always the most helpful when you're trying to be efficient in plan review. With the total building performance, again, we're looking at a report. There's going to be a report at the beginning. So obviously, if you pick that performance path, then I'm going to need that report because that report needs to demonstrate in a commercial sense that you're using 80% of the standard reference design, right? Versus, if, and again, so I need that report to show that from the beginning, this proposal will meet that. At the end, I'm going to need that same documentation, right? I need you to verify that you installed it and that the numbers still are consistent in that 80% calculation. And there's going to be a significant different various ways that we provide this documentation. I'm going to jump straight to it instead of walking through it or getting to it later. An example of this would be this kind of a project, right? This is a project we've shown before. We talked about it's a school, but as part of their submittal, they're claiming, if we were to zoom in here, we'd see they're claiming to be utilizing Section 407 and the performance path. They're going to show me a set of reports that demonstrate the method of compliance, right? As designed, this is the baseline. This is what they're using as the base. This is the as designed. Now, again, I'm not going to recalculate this, but I am going to be, as a plans examiner, verifying. This is going to expedite my plan review in a way because I'm going to be verifying that you said you're using 2 inches of poly iso on the slab, right? So I'm going to go to those slab details and see if there's prescribed 2 inches of polyiso. Now I'm also going to ask the question, what's the U factor or R value associated with it? That'll come up a little bit later. I see that you've identified that you're going to use a 0.49 sliding door, swinging door. I'm going to verify that the door schedule matches that value. Again, I had this conversation with the design team I'm currently working with, um, because they provide a calculation showing a point. They, in their kid's situation, was a 0.4 door, but their details, their plan shows a 0.9. Okay, in the reality is in a performance, there's that level of flexibility would allow them to maybe use a 0.9 door, but you're reporting a 0.4. So where's the inconsistency? Tell me which one's right. Same concept when it comes to how we calculate other things like the number of operating hours, right? They're doing this mathematical calculation that they're expecting this building to be operating 50 hours, and these are the number of people that are going to be in those rooms. So again, they're going to give me all of this report as part of their submittal document for compliance with the performance path. And again, it's going to show me the cost, the baseline cost or performance, and the proposed cost, right? So it was the baseline. They expected this system to cost them $39,000 a year to operate. Under their proposal, they're moving it to 21. That's a savings of 44%. And so again, I need them to at least be less than 20, make at least 20% savings compared to the reference design. They're getting 40. So we should be good and we can move forward. I can verify that again, the rooms they have identified have the appropriate, we got lighting controls, right? They've got different they've got zoning, they've got assemblies, right? They're telling me that they're going to be using those insulations that are built on the design. So again, I can verify all of this information from windows and doors against those designs. If they're using another, again, if we're doing a traditional prescriptive path, like ASHRAE, then ASHRAE again has its own reports and they can give those documentations. If they're telling me it's prescriptive, I'm going to apply those same expectations to the entire, the 4 pillars of my energy code. I'm going to look for some type of documentation, right, of the building thermal envelope. A lot of times, this may be a simple note that says this is the insulation requirements for the entire building. And then every time you see insulation on a detail, it says see page T3. See page G4, whatever it might be, or they will have actually put those in the specific details. I'm going to be looking for all those expectations for documentation of the insulation, the windows, the air barriers, all those components have to be documented as part of this assembly, as not only the location, but the actual materials themselves. And so again, like we talked about, this is the kind of detail that we're going to want submitted back to us. And when we start talking about those submittal expectations from the document that we saw earlier, that's going to be one of those things that we want to see. Flow through a few of these. Part of that is, again, recognizing that not all insulation is the same and not all types of insulation perform the same way. And so while having this information is incredibly important, because if I have a design, and I talked about this, we talk about this all the time. If I have a design that expects me to be using a cellulose insulation with a vapor barrier, and I decide at the last minute or in the field that, hey, we're going to change this to spray foam, right? I'm going to, this could impact more than just the thermal value. It could impact my water resistive layers. It could impact vapor barriers and those kinds of things as well, because again, it could be a big change. It could be going the opposite, right? Where we've just said, well, we're going to use spray foam. We're proposing spray foam, and then when we get on site, we've decided we're going to go with fiberglass bat. Well, now we've got a bigger change than just, does the thermal envelope still have the appropriate thermal resistance? It becomes again a question of well, is this part of a fire rated assembly? Is this part of where's my thermal envelope now? This was providing more than one function in its design. Now we have to start incorporating other things. So again, It's part of understanding that detail and making sure that we have all of that up front. A simple R19 in the wall is not good enough to know how that building is supposed to be designed. Because again, it could be something completely different. If they've chosen to go with a prescriptive path and they choose not to use one of those R values or U factor calculations, right? U factor looking at the entire sum of the R value looking at a particular material's thermal resistance, they may choose to perform a component performance alternative. What I've had designers confused on this phrase before. They've told me we're using the performance alternative com check. And it's like, well, that's for the envelope, right? That's just for the envelope. When we start talking about com check, remember the com check is just giving us a report of the envelope, and everything else we're just typing in values, right? It does the calculation for the envelope, and that's where we're going to verify certain information. But for the if we're looking at it from a perspective of the information input for the interior and exterior lighting or the mechanical systems, again, is not coming from a database in the ComCheck. Someone is inputting those values. I was looking at one yesterday, not a huge deal. Their exterior lighting plan, they listed all the exterior lighting except for one particular type of fixture. Now, there were two of them, and they represent, and they were already going to save 70%. So I didn't reject the comment as much as made a note that their ComCheck did not incorporate lighting fixture FN2, right? So again, there's ways to move it forward, but again, this type of documentation is going to allow me to verify very quickly whether or not the right insulation is in the proper location against what's going to be my my tables, right? So again, we can see the different ways that this information can be helpful, can be useful, and it's something that if we're going to be we're talking about documentation, building thermal envelope documentation details and documentation are going to be a huge part of that process. We'll jump down. One of the things that I think is important, again, we talk about window features and that kind of a concept. We see that in the ComCheck. And again, this is one of those areas when I'm in the field, I'm verifying the ComCheck. I'm verifying what's on the plans, right? Because the plans need to correlate to the ComCheck. The ComCheck needs to maybe correlating back to our mechanical design. All of these things work together to support an effective project. And that's, again, where we start to see some of this breakdown, where we may have at one point the team designs a ComCheck, sends that ComCheck over to a separate mechanical design company who will then evaluate, run their equipment calculations, their heating, cooling load calculations, their equipment selection, all based off of that ComCheck. Well, at the same time, a designer team or a contractor comes back and changes something. Again, this is one of those places where we get this caught up all the time. And so again, we want to make sure that that type of documentation is provided on both what is going to be the fenestration and what is going to be part of that air barrier, right? What details are we expecting? What method of testing? What is the expectation? I had one the other day where, again, the mechanical load, the mechanical design was based on a tight construction listed at 2.5 ACH, right? The ComCheck and the design documents said that the building air leakage was going to be 5 ACH. And while that may not seem like a huge amount of air difference, it is a significant difference when you're thinking about how much you size a piece of equipment. And in that particular design, they were really close to being within that 10 to 15% of compliance, expecting that all the air in the volume of that building was going to stay there for a more significant amount of time, versus the designer who's coming in, the traditional architectural designer is coming in saying, well, it's going to leak. We're going to see air changes double what the mechanical designers are thinking. So that equipment's going to run longer or run more than was intended. So when you come back and you make these cost benefit calculations, that equipment's going to run more than it needed to because the envelope wasn't as secure as we wanted it. So again, it came back. It's going to be a question of, what method, and are we getting the consistent air barriers? We'll talk more about air barriers in a couple weeks. But again, we know there are different ways to test it. We know that there are different ways to visually inspect for it. And so again, how are we going to be doing that, and what are those expectations is going to be critical to making sure that we get the right building in that process. And like I said, that concept of air leakage really affects mechanical system design. Uh, and so we want to have those details, not just of, how much ventilation are we getting the proper amount of ventilation to every room? Are we getting the proper, what amount of air are we getting to each room? And how does it compare to all the requirements we have in the energy code and the mechanical code for compliance? Whether, again, the UMC, the IMC, the IECC, all of them are looking at the mechanical system as a critical component, and we need those details on how the system was designed, making sure we get I was in a code development conversation on Tuesday where they argued for about an hour about whether or not, how important the the right selection of heating and cooling days is for their climate. And again, we want to make sure that we get the right information and we can stave off or redirect early issues by getting the right information and identifying the right heating cooling load. And sometimes that heating cooling load can be assisted with that again, that ComCheck or ComCheck is just going to give us a compliance report where it's going to take the information provided by the design team, input it in there, and then it will do a quick reference to the code to say, yes, this system matches with the expectations associated with energy efficiency. And so that's how we can, again, evaluate that. We see that requirement both in commercial and residential. We need that information. Now, we're going to do a couple different discussions on manual J calculations here in the future. We did that manual J training a couple weeks ago. So again, we want to make sure mechanical systems are something that people understand. Envelopes, I think we're starting to get to the place where we understand the envelope. Now we need to move to that next piece, which is now the mechanical, right? Here's that example we talked about earlier, so I'm going to skip over it. But again, with that information from there, we'll be able to, again, evaluate the efficiency of the equipment against the tables to verify that we've got the right equipment in place. And again, this is, again, verifying and allowing, recognizing that as inspectors, we're verifying that same information in the field. So again, if I've taken the time I take the time to make sure the design works and does what the designer wants as a plans examiner. Now my staff is out evaluating, making sure that, again, my ratings for the equipment matches with what's installed. Nothing would be more frustrating than you expect or propose a particular design and the equipment that gets dropped off is not going to work, right? And again, I see this more and more. This is a conversation I've had a lot lately where, again, we provide 410A refrigerant systems and A2L. The impacts that we've seen coming from some of the different manufacturer changes in refrigerant systems. I've had several projects that have come in saying, hey, we're going to use a 410. And then they get out in the field and the contractor says, hey, we can't get 410 right now. We're going to have to go to a different system, a different refrigerant. It may not be a huge change, but we want to make sure that it doesn't become a huge issue. And this is not a conversation to talk about the impact of A2Ls on mechanical designs. But again, we want to make sure that we completely understand that what's going in the field is what's going to be installed. What's on the plans, it gets installed. And sometimes we're going to have some of those change outs, especially as there are impacts from outside forces, right? I'm going to call it forces. I don't know, that's not the right word, but again, that can really affect how that works. And again, those duct designs, I need to see that duct design. I don't know how many times I have to tell them I need to see the ducts. And not only do I want to see the ducts, but I want to make sure my inspector, when he's on site, depending on that design, has a diagram, a detail sheet that says what each termination, each elbow, each discharge is going to look like. He's not going to, they're not going to know that an ST4 looks like this, right? Or all I see is 8-inch, or 12-inch line. Well, is that flex? Is that round? What is it? So that when my staff, or when I'm out there as an inspector, I'm seeing what's going on and I can evaluate, is that the right because a lot of that mechanical design is based on equivalent lengths, and if we put the wrong elbow, we may not get the right amount of air at the end. Same thing for controls. We've talked about controls before. We need to know their location, and so we need to know that that sequence is provided. I've had to, again, remind contractors as part of that detail, right? That we see that mechanical detail is going to be the control sequencing. And so when we look at up here, when we look up here, we're looking for that clarification. I want the equipment control, not just the control like device number. I want to know what the sequencing is going to be to make sure that we have occupancy sensors or some type of a time-based clock or whatever we're going to expect out of it. So again, that information is important for us to have, as well as when we start thinking about things in the lighting side of it, right? The lighting fixture schedule, the control narrative, so that we know when we're looking at lighting systems what we're expecting. I know that some designers are looking at the newer versions of the code where we get a little bit even more in depth into what we're expecting controls on. But again, we're thinking about lighting, and I want to make sure that the lighting calculations are done properly. And so that if I have sleeping areas, depending on whether it's residential, occupancy, or a hotel, I can know what those requirements are versus the general lighting in an office building or in a commercial retail space. And so again, I need to know those lighting allowances as well as those lighting controls. And sometimes that's going to be a comm check. If that's not a comm check and they make a decision to incorporate that into a design, then I'm going to need to see that complete calculation of the lighting capabilities, both what it was allowed to do and what you've provided. And again, those are some things that a lot of people aren't including in those calculations or in those early submittals. So one of the things that I think, and again, we talk about the location of lighting controls, lighting fixtures, occupancies, day lighting sensors, exterior lighting. Again, making sure we provide that documentation so that I'm not asking on the third plan review for the same information on exterior lighting uh, allowances or light exterior lighting controls, right? Oh, went too fast, click too hard. There it is. So again, that's a lot of times I'm asking for 3 and 4 times. What is the exterior lighting control? Uh, well, they turn on, they turn off. No. I need to know where is this a time sensor? Is this and so being clear in my explanation is a lot more helpful than saying we need exterior lighting controls, right? Explain what the code reference is. Explain in with very good detail what those expectations are. And like I said, if we hit it up front at the beginning in that submittal expectations, that submittal checklist, it's a lot more helpful. And again, we understand that depending on the project, if you're following prescriptive and you're supposed to be providing section 406. This is a huge thing. People are not used to, at least in some of the projects I still do in states that have done this, communities that have 21 codes. They're not remembering to include that additional efficiency option, those credits, right? The number of credits they're required to have, and that they have to provide some documentation that they're meeting it. So I need to know, even if it's a simple, line like this, that we're going to follow additional credits. It's 10 required. Tell me how many are you proposing and what are they, right? So put a nice little chart in there that says, hey, we need 10. We're going to do it through reducing our improving our insulation and improving our air leakage. Okay, so how are you documenting that 15%? Are you taking that 15% off of every value? You're making it that much thicker? Or are you going to do it, again, or are you going to do it through some comm check, some comm check report? So I know we got like 1 minute left. So if anybody has any questions, again, I hope to have this updated submittal package. First draft, I think, is going to be tomorrow. So hopefully we'll have it by the end of the time. But again, remember, if we'll be doing our inspection series next week. I'm thinking Andre or I'm not sure who's going to be teaching it next week. Actually, I'll be in Texas in the afternoon. So it's one of the most important design rules in our office is to create documents that are understandable by the two actual users. the HGA and the GC and subs. I think that's a great point, Carl, and I think that's, it's us. And I think one of the things too is it has to be readable. Again, I have one project I was looking at yesterday where it took me longer to figure out what was going on because they tried to shove so much on one page of paper, right? I get it. Paper costs money. I've paid for it myself, right? But it's really helpful, especially in the digital age, to try to make it a more readable font, which is by no means a slight against myself. Sometimes I get small fonts on our screen. Now, if you do have questions, feel free to reach out. Use the survey to put in any information, questions, and future topics. If you're willing to host one of our in-person trainings, I know we're going to be looking to do some more of those after the summer, in the early fall, and into the winter. So feel free to reach out to us. Let us know. We will be sending out again once I get that submittal checklist. I'll make sure we incorporate that into our future trainings. If you do have questions or along the way, feel free to reach out to us through the helpline or visit the website. I know that's going to be changing here soon. At least that's what they keep telling me. So I'm not the one doing it, so I don't know when, but it'll be changing soon. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us, and I appreciate you guys. Be careful this weekend. Enjoy the weather, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.